What's going on, YouTube? This is SG1 Sports here on the USC channel at the voice of college football. In this video, I'm going to give you my 5 top returning players for USC. Now, this is based off of last season, not based off of potential for 2022 or anything like that. Simply based off of what we saw in 2021. So the top 5 guys returning based off of what they did last season. So just returning players. I know there are a lot of guys coming in at USC, a lot of transfers that will, a lot of guys that will probably be in their top 5 or 10 players, but we're just looking at the players that are coming back. So the guys that will be back from last year's team. And we start with number 5, Xavier Alford, defensive back. 31 tackles last season, 3 interceptions, a guy that will probably be a starter again this season, and was a big-time player for them in the secondary. They had some nice pieces last season. I know it didn't come together. This was a rough year, but you look at just the talent on the roster. This team had a talented roster, and they have some guys coming back as well. I believe Xavier Alford is one of those players, and again, I expect him to have a pretty big role in 2022. Those 3 interceptions, really big for them last season. Number 4, we're going to stay in the secondary. Kalen Bullock. He had 40 tackles last season, 2 interceptions. Another guy that I think has a chance to be a starter for them in the secondary. And looking at what he did last year, he was one of their top players in the secondary. So looking at Bullock and Alford, 2 guys that maybe didn't start every game last season, but definitely played significant roles, had an impact. And again, I think they could be starters, the 2 starting safeties for this team in 2022. But looking back at what they have coming back, they don't have a ton of production, a ton of guys coming back from last season. Guys either entered the transfer portal or they just went on to the NFL, graduated or whatever. Pola Mayau at safety, he's gone. Greg Johnson at safety, he's gone. Chase Williams at safety, he's gone. So these 2 guys definitely going to have a big impact, I believe, for 2022, and they're 2 of the top players coming back from last year's team. Moving on to number 3, I think Brett Nealon here at center. He started all 12 games last season. He is a 3-year starter for this USC team. He was honorable mention all-conference this past season, so I expect him to be the leader for them on that offensive line. You also have another offensive lineman in Andrew Voorhees, another guy that was all-conference honorable mention. I didn't want to put 2 offensive linemen here on this list, so he's a guy that I also considered. And going back to the defensive side of the ball, Corey Foreman, another player that I considered on this list, had a little bit of injury issues last season, wasn't super productive as far as total stats, but when he did play, he did make an impact. So that's a good example of a guy that might be in the top 5 or in the top 10 this upcoming season, but based off of what he did in 2021, not quite enough for him to make it into the top 5. But I was definitely looking at Corey Foreman, and I think he definitely has the potential. Obviously, big-time recruit coming out of high school, has the potential to be a really, really good player for them in 2022. But we're still looking at 2021, and we go to the number 2 player now. That is Gary Bryant Jr., wide receiver, had 44 catches last season, 13.2 yards per reception, 7 touchdowns for USC. Really was big for them. Drake London got all the attention. Of course, he put up crazy numbers, over 1,000 yards receiving, 7 touchdowns. But Gary Bryant also had 7 touchdowns, so he was big in the red zone. Pretty good yard per catch average there at 13.2. He's the guy for them, I think, coming back. You also had Taj Washington, another receiver for USC last season that I think you could definitely make a case for him on this list as well. Both guys really, really good coming back. I'm looking at Washington and Bryant. I did go with Bryant here to make it onto this list, but like I said, I mean, you really can't go wrong with either one of these receivers. Both were really, really good for them last year. Washington actually had more yards and more receptions, but he played a couple more games. Gary Bryant missed a couple of games. And so for me, it's Bryant, again, Washington. Put either one of them on this list, and I think you've got a pretty good list. But let's move on now to number 2. And again, I'm trying not to put too many guys from the same positions when I do these lists. Number 1 for USC, I think it's going to be Tuli Tuipulotu. Hopefully I said his name right. 48 tackles last season, 7.5 tackles for loss, 5 sacks. He was first team all Pac-12 this past season. He's definitely, I think, the best guy on the defensive side of the ball coming back this year. can definitely change a game, get after the quarterback, do a lot of things. Really big to have him back. I think he's their best player coming back. He was 4th on the team in tackles last season. Also knocked down a couple of passes, had a fumble recovery, had 2 forced fumbles, had a defensive touchdown. So he was very productive, and I think he is maybe the best player for this team. I've got him at number 1 coming back for 2022 based off of 2021. Now, does that mean he will be their best player next season? That's a little bit of a different conversation because you got a lot of guys coming in. You got guys that will improve from last year. And so when we finally put that list together, which we normally do on into the summer, we will put together a top 10 list that is a prediction for the top 10 players for 2022. But these are my top 5 players returning from 2021 from USC. Would love to get your thoughts. What do you like from this list? What do you disagree with? Give me your thoughts down in the comments below.